some Democrat governor sends in millions of ballots all over the country. Who are they sending them to? Nobody has any idea. They're sending them to dogs. They actually have them sent to dogs. Voter fraud by dogs. Is it a problem in the United States of America? That was a direct quote from the Commander-in-Chief himself. So maybe it is. I guess we'll have to do our own research about it, essentially. I looked it up. There was a woman named Jane Balogh, or Jane Balogh, maybe, Balogh. In 2007, she registered her dog, a Shepherd Terrier mix named Duncan M. McDonald. She registered this dog to vote in the great state of Washington, and she received, as I understand it, 3 absentee ballots for the dog, which she sent back in as void. And she said that she did this in order to alert her own state government to other possible voter fraud, I suppose. I think she registered her electric bill in her dog's name first, which is how she was able to do this. But maybe there are many other cases of dogs being registered to vote that I haven't heard about. Maybe I just scratched the surface of this. But yeah, dog voter fraud, it's a thing. Call your Congress people, find out about what's going on in your state regarding this topic. But I mean, personally, I still believe that systemic racism is the worst problem facing the U.S. Also, followed by healthcare, affordable housing, global warming. And there seems to be this talking point, however, that like a serious problem facing our country is like divisiveness or something, polarity, maybe political polarity, an inability to find common ground with people who disagree with us on political topics. Now, I don't sympathize with MAGA idiots or feel that their fascist sympathizing smooth brains deserve respect or tolerance. Nevertheless, I want to limit my classist thinking, because even if some of these bunkerboy voters are voting against their own interests, for me to demonize rural, uneducated, poor people still plays into the deplorables versus elites narrative that the Onanist News Network and faux news push. So we're to start finding common ground with these people with whom I seem to share no values. Well, I thought let's start with the species responsible for voter fraud themselves, humanity's best friend, dogs. Because there are plenty of loving, compassionate dog companions among the red hat people, if my very unscientific perusal of Instagram is accurate. So the question I'll pose to these Republican voters is, how can you claim to be a dog lover and still support Bunker Boy? The first thing I'll point to is his own rhetoric, his own speeches, like the things he says on the record. There is a video from the Now This channel, with which I'm sure you're familiar, the channel at least, I'm sure you're familiar with. If you haven't seen this video, I'll link to it. It's called, what is Bunker Boy's problem with dogs? And, they use his government name rather than his code name. But, regardless, you know which odious cretin that we're all talking about. You can watch the video, draw your own conclusions. everyone knows he's the first president in 100 years not to have a pet dog in the White House, which, when you consider the number of homeless dogs in the US, is, in my opinion, unfortunate and uncharitable. It's not like he would have to take care of the dog himself. It would just be a nice gesture to have one there. And it's not like he takes care of his, his own kids, besides giving the ones that are grown jobs, in the on his cabinet as advisors, right? And the only question I'll ask about the video, the one that I'll link, the Now This video, is that of all the animals to continuously, repeatedly use in a pejorative metaphor, like, why choose what many consider the most loyal animal humans have ever had a symbiotic relationship with, a relationship that's lasted thousands of years. And I mean, it would be nice, it's nice of you to say that you respect all life equally, but to be frank, like, I care about dogs more than I care about other animals. In the same way that maybe someone, people care about their families more than they care about other people. They care about their families and friends more. And, that's like a big part of a lot of conservative ideologies, right? That you are free to care about whether it's just your family or your family and friends or your tribe or something, more than you care about everyone else. And that's why contemporary conservatives don't like the idea of social justice, because they think that they're going to be forced to care about everyone more than they care about the people that they naturally care about. And in my case, I mean, I am a big proponent of social justice. I recognize that increasing my empathy and empathetic actions whenever possible towards other groups, whether it's other animals, whether it's other people who are outside of my family and my friends, that can only make the world a better place, and that things, actions that perpetuate empathy are noble pursuits and will lead to a better society for everyone. Yeah, and I mean, it's like, it's next time someone says, like, all lives matter to you, like, maybe push back on them about it. Like, what do they mean? Like, do they hold everyone as totally equal? Do they not care about some people more than others? Like, I mean, because they are essentially viewing a statement like Black Lives Matter. They're just viewing it as a rhetorical device instead of as like a real mantra, and so they're hitting you back with what they think is a rhetorical advice. A rhetorical device. So, if that's the way that they're going to treat your call for social justice, then push back on them about it, like, because chances are they won't really have anything to back that up with. So, like I said, like, if you watch the Now This video about, why the president doesn't like dogs, or why he uses metaphors which paint dogs as lowly creatures, maybe, why not insult your political opponents with, rats or snakes? Like, I'm not saying rats or snakes are bad, like, they're not, but, like, certainly it's like language that other people are more familiar with. Like, there's already these pejorative connotations with these animals, whereas dogs mean a lot to people, and the idea of harming dogs, or that dogs, like, are not inherently deserving of care by their loyal nature, like, that's upsetting to me, at least, like, and possibly to other people. I don't think that's a very controversial thing to say. The White House certainly had a major problem with the assertion that protesters at some point were chanting "pigs in a blanket, fry 'em like bacon." And as many people have noted, notably Ron Swanson, pigs and dogs really aren't that different from like a biological perspective, or even like from a intelligence perspective. And I mean, it can be difficult to have good faith discussions about animal rights. It is difficult to set the parameters from which to start. If you want to have that kind of discussion, like a philosophical discussion, because it's easy to just bring things like that up. It's easy to say, why is it illegal to eat horse meat when we eat cows? Our people eat cows, like in this country and countries all over the world every day. Is there what is the fundamental difference between those two animals? And if horses are, more deserving of care than cows are, then why is it okay to have horses used in a sport where they're used and then eventually killed, when their usefulness is up? But I want to stay focused on dogs here, regarding their rights, and their right not to be abused. I'm not sure about their right to vote. That is probably a different discussion. And I actually read this quotation from Ted Chiang, the sci-fi short story writer. Just coincidentally, the other day I read this before bunkerboy had issued that statement. But Ted Chiang said, "You don't have to believe that bomb-sniffing dogs should have the right to vote to think that abusing them is a bad idea." Which I think is there's a lot to unpack in that statement. And I just like it because it is an important rhetorical thing to always think about, that if you're talking about inalienable rights, or rights that, whether it's rights that people have or rights that animals have or whatever, that means that those rights are not connected to being earned for qualities that they have or whatever, that they should be given to everyone. And that's what what a lot of our society is based on. So these are important things, especially if you are going to call yourself something like a strict constitutionalist or something like that. I don't really care about that kind of thing. I'm not into legal arguments or anything. It just doesn't really interest me. But a lot of people out there are really concerned with arguing on the internet about things like the Bill of Rights. So it's important to think about these ideas, I think, if you're going to have those arguments, or if you want to win them, or if it means something to your ego to be able to score points in rhetoric about things like this. So after Bunkerboy took office, just as the EPA and the Department of Interior, the EPA and the Department of the Interior removed any links, or just as they removed any links to climate change data from their websites, which is pretty predictable, right? We know where this political party stands on global warming. As they were doing that, the Department of Agriculture, and this is a quotation, removed the inspection reports of businesses accused of animal abuse by the government, end quote. It's a quotation from Michael Lewis's book, The Fifth Risk. So why remove this data about companies that were suspected or have been accused of abusing animals? And to be fair, I don't know how much of this, I don't think any of it was necessarily abusing dogs, so some of it certainly could have been when you're talking about things like puppy mills. But I suspect that a lot of this was more about farm animals. But still, I understand that the oil lobby prevents Republicans from accepting the science of global warming. I understand how that works. But still, it takes a special perverse case of regulatory capture to sacrifice animal welfare transparency at the altar of these plutocrats, corporate lobbyist masters. And of course, this is not where the deregulation has started or stopped. You can look up all the deregulatory things that have happened since Bunkerboy took office, And I'll quickly read just like two examples. These don't have to do with dogs, but like this is an example of how this administration thinks about animals. They've removed restrictions on commercial fishing in a protected marine preserve southeast of Cape Cod that is home to rare corals and a number of endangered sea animals. They proposed revising limits on the number of endangered marine mammals and sea turtles that can be unintentionally killed or injured with sword fishing nets on the West Coast. So this is like a pattern, and like I find it upsetting. Like what, like I said, I think dogs are more important than sea turtles, but like that doesn't mean I don't think sea turtles should be protected when you have that choice. If you can create that government regulation. Like, I don't think unfettered capitalism is more important than something like that. And that's why I think deregulation, on the whole, is pretty evil, at least the way that it's been put into practice by this current administration, for sure. Because we're not talking about like dezoning, like in post-industrial cities, or like net neutrality questions, or the Glass-Steagall Act. Like, we're talking about the government ceasing to investigate reports of animal abuse, or at least if they're still investigating them, not being transparent about it. Like, we can't blame the government for the crimes of public enterprise, but this deregulation doesn't seem to stop with farm animals. Strangely, as reported by the Center for Biological Diversity, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, an office within the Department of the Interior, moved to strip gray wolves of Endangered Species Act protection across the lower 48 states. I think this move happened back in 2017, and I don't know that it ever came to anything because I haven't found any conclusive evidence that it did, but it still strikes me as a dangerous thing to even move to do. Like, we have so many problems in this country. Like, you think that stripping gray wolves of their protection from the Endangered Species Act should be like a high priority on your list of things to do. And you can imagine that there's a wide breadth of arguments that can be made and are made about the status of wolves in the contiguous US. And wolves, of course, behaviorally are not the same as domestic dogs. Still, technically, they are either the same species or they like two subspecies of the same species, or they're two species from the same genus which can still interbreed. So like, as far as, I'm not a scientist, but like from my understanding of what a species is, it's any members, like any organisms that can both interbreed and then their offspring can continue to interbreed, which wolves and dogs are like that. Like, which is why you have wolf dogs. In a lot of sanctuaries, wolf dogs, or people have wolf dogs as pets, not in New York, but in a lot of states, you see it all over Instagram. And as a dog lover, can you really support an administration which wants to allow game hunting of wolves? Like according to the website Business Insider, which I don't know if that's a reputable website, so if it's not, then feel free to let me know. But they say no lethal gray wolf attack on a human has ever occurred in the US. And I mean, that sounds hyperbolic, right? Like, I'm sure that it's happened. Because, and it just wasn't recorded, right? I mean, we don't know about people, living out in the woods. Like, this country is 250 years old. Like, but the fact that they don't really have any statistics that show that it happens frequently at all, like, means that, like, why would we be like afraid of these animals? Like, and I don't know if that includes like Alaska or not. And of course, people have always been afraid of wolves because, wolves have always killed livestock. Like, that like is a thing. And I mean, coyotes like are probably much more of a problem with that kind of thing in the contiguous 48 states. And for instance, like, as a society, like, and people do die from domestic dog attacks. Like, that certainly is a thing. Like, unfortunately. And we do allow, as a society, we allow dog euthanasia. Like, no, there are people who are against it, and it is an upsetting thing, but we certainly do allow it. But like I said, there are differences behaviorally between wolves and domestic dogs. Wolves are afraid of people. This is well documented. Like, if you see a wolf, it's probably going to run away from you if you see it out in the wilderness. And they don't come into cities, like they don't come into towns, like and like wolves can help curb deer populations, and deer actually do, and I'm not talking about stags killing people with their antlers, but deer running in front of cars cause about 200 fatalities in the US every year. I think that's also from Business Insider, from that website. And I'm not saying that we should have a whole bunch of wolves everywhere to curb deer populations. I don't have anything against deer, even though it is dangerous. But I just think that people shouldn't speed in their cars then, like, to at least minimize the impact that you're going to have. If you happen to be near a deer, or minimize the possibility of hitting a deer, so you don't put yourself in that situation. And also, like, we don't know about whether, like, well, if we had a deer overpopulation, we don't know if increasing the wolf population would really even help with that, because deer seem to have no problem with going near people's houses, whereas wolves kind of tend to stay away. Wolves are a lot smarter, and they don't want to be near humans smartly. So, and also in Canada, this is a study which just came out recently. They decided to kill almost 500 wolves. I don't know if it was in a couple of provinces or throughout all of Canada, but they killed 500 wolves in order to help the caribou population come back, and they found that statistically it didn't even help. So essentially their goal was to help the endangered caribou population, and I don't know whether it was because mountain lions still filled that gap and just killed as many caribou as were dying already. I don't know really what the data behind the data was, what the cause for the caribou population to not rebound was, but killing all those wolves seemed to be in vain. So I have a lot of problems with deciding that gray wolves should not be protected. In the lower 48 states, we don't have such a strong population of them, and I think that they deserve respect as an animal population. They shouldn't be hunted, certainly, whether it's from helicopters or by people. There's enough things you can hunt. You can hunt deer. Bunkerboy's son's obsession with big game hunting is disgusting. It's gross enough, and seems to continue to the present day, as Junior's response to the documentary Tiger King, which I have not seen. But if you watch the OAN episode of John Oliver, there's a clip there where Junior is he says he didn't realize how inexpensive it would be to procure a tiger. I don't remember what the dollar amount was, but I think it was something like $3,000. He was like, well, he was like, oh, I didn't realize how inexpensive it would be to get a tiger at this point, or at that point in time, whenever Tiger King was recorded. It's what, that was your takeaway from this whole controversial documentary? What would you want to buy that $3,000 tiger for? That's just it doesn't rub me the right way, that whole sentiment. But let's get back to dogs, whom we all agree shouldn't be hunted. And we can talk about whether we should support politicians whose kids, would kill dogs, for fun or whatever. We can talk about that in a little bit. And it's sad to me that, in my wheelhouse and gaslighting and hunkering down, the dog whistle has become, it's captured the zeitgeist, this phrase, dog whistle. You know, like though pitbull iconography is sadly used by white supremacists, as exhibited by groups like the 211 Boot Boys and depicted in the movie Green Room, which is a good movie but quite difficult to watch from a dog lover's perspective. Like if you are someone who is, who would be really upset by seeing like dogs who are attacking humans or whatever, like in a very like Hollywood kind of way. But if you don't watch that movie, then, it's still sad to me to hear dogs associated, even by just semantic and like semiotic coincidence. But it's still sad to me to hear like dog whistle mean that dogs are associated with like ethno-nationalism. But Bunker Boy, like, he's like, when he's not busy tweeting actual proclamations of white power from his bunker during this Mar-a-Lago virus pandemic, he takes it a step further, though, like using actual dogs to dog whistle. And like, Bunker Boy threatened protesters in the District of Columbia at the end of May that he would sick the most vicious dogs on them. That's a quotation, right? Sick the most vicious dogs. The troubling aspect of this statement, the most troubling aspect is, of course, the danger to the protesters. And the other most troubling aspect is the historical ramifications of alluding to a method, dog attack, that is well known and documented as an anti-civil rights police tactic used against Black and brown people throughout U.S. history. That dogs are only useful to Bunker Boy as a weapon has terrifying implications. That phrase, sick the most vicious dogs, is, in my opinion, the language of an animal abuser. The only way to make a dog indiscriminately hostile to a crowd is to abuse it. Because dogs are naturally suspicious of individuals and of strangers. Some dogs are naturally suspicious of individuals and of strangers on an individual basis. But full-grown domesticated dogs do not become weaponized towards entire groups of people unless they are abused into doing so. The Secret Service has guard dogs in the White House, like guard dogs of the White House, who are, if I'm not mistaken, Belgian Malinois or Malinois. I'm not sure how you say it. They're essentially slighter German Shepherds. And I'm familiar with German Shepherds. I've been around police German Shepherds in Berlin, for instance. They are remarkably well trained. It is possible that, these dogs know attack commands, for instance, but to suggest that they should be turned on peaceful civil rights protesters is grotesque. The act in itself, sicking guard dogs on a crowd, putting them in a battle situation in which the dogs could be hurt as the protesters defended themselves, that is overtly endorsing animal abuse. So regardless of the language there, like if the dogs were put into that situation, let off of leash or like into a crowd in the city of Washington D.C., like that would be animal abuse, because you would be setting these dogs up to get hurt, like while there's tear gas around or like rubber bullets or something. Like that would be animal abuse, I'm pretty sure, like even like legally. Like these Secret Service dogs might be guard dogs in a sense, but the idea that Bunker Boy would sick them on the protesters and that they would act like, the Dobermans from the movie Clue, like it's absurd. It just makes me think he doesn't know anything about dog training, dogs who have jobs, essentially, like for lack of a better word. And like as far as the rest of Bunker Boy's administration, like we don't know that they endorse animal abuse. And like here, we'll have to give like this administration credit because they did sign that piece of legislation, the Preventing Animal Cruelty and Torture Act, which is very important. It expanded on an Obama-era policy, so it's not brand new, and it was bipartisan. But it was first taken up by the Democratic-controlled House, so it was bipartisan. They passed it unanimously, and then Moscow Mitch's Senate passed it unanimously, and then bunkerboy signed it. So we do have to give credit that this happened. But at the same time, if it was a unanimous piece of legislation, what was he going to do? Veto it? Like, actions have to speak louder than words. And also, if he knew that this legislation was on the table, like, we have to question, was that why this animal abuse information about companies suspected or accused of animal abuse was pulled from the United States Department of Agriculture website as soon as bunkerboy's administration came into power? Like, did he have advanced knowledge and these companies put pressure on him to take this off because this PACT Act, the Preventing Animal Cruelty and Torture Act, was going to make these make essentially what were already crimes. Of course, torturing an animal was already a crime in I think every state, but it was going to make it a federal crime. That way, if someone, for instance, like, is accused of something, that they could be brought to a different state, if they fled that state. So we don't, that we have to give them credit for passing that act, like, give the whole federal government credit for that act. Like, it's a very good thing, but, like, it doesn't make me feel that much better about this administration as a whole. Okay, so Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's obviously not a part of the administration anymore, because now we have, Karen McEnsaney, but, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and of course this is not her fault, and maybe I'm grasping at straws here, but her younger brother, David Huckabee, when he was 17, so he was a kid, I'll acknowledge that, but he once killed a dog while he was at Scouts camp and was sent home as punishment for it. This is certainly, like, no smoking gun, but it doesn't make me feel good about, if I was working with someone and I found that out, like, that their brother did, obviously it wouldn't be their fault. But this was, like, common knowledge back when, like, Mike Huckabee was running for president, I believe. This isn't, like, a secret thing. We don't know the details about it, but it doesn't make me feel good about this administration. And, maybe it's not fair game for me to talk about something like this, but to me it's a lot more upsetting than the idea that, Hunter Biden had a sham job in the Ukraine, for instance. And of course, Hunter Biden is an adult. David Huckabee was, like I said, 17, almost 18 at the time. So maybe not legally an adult in all states. But, we do tend to, think that people should be responsible for their actions by the time they're, like, around 17, at least. And, so maybe that's it for the cabinet. Well, almost, right? Because we do know that at least one more White House cabinet employee, we know that one more does actually care demonstrably about animals. Brian Harrison, the Chief of Staff of the Department of Health and Human Services, he bred and sold Labradoodles, so Labrador poodle mixes, from his home in Texas and sold them for $2,700 each, before he was briefly tapped to coordinate the Department of Health and Human Services early response to the Mar-a-Lago virus back in February. That's bad, dog. Fortune passes everywhere. And I'll link to some great rescue organizations in case, your stocks are going through the roof at the moment and you have some extra cash to spread around.